There's a saying in business that success leaves clues. And after years of studying successful Etsy shops, I've realized that the stores making the most sales are actually following very similar patterns. So in this video, I'm going to break down the biggest patterns I've noticed and how you can apply them to your own Etsy shop. Something I always tell people who want to start selling on Etsy is this: don't just focus on creating products. Study what's already working. Because the fastest way to learn any business model is by looking at people who are already succeeding in it. And when you do that on Etsy, certain patterns start showing up again and again. And the first thing I notice when I look at successful Etsy shops is this: most of them dominate a very specific niche. When you land on their shop, it's immediately obvious what they specialize in. Maybe it's wedding templates, teacher resources, or branding tools for small businesses. Whatever it is, the shop feels cohesive. Everything in their store makes sense together. This is where a lot of beginners get confused. When people first start on Etsy, they often want to sell a little bit of everything, maybe a planner, some wall art, a wedding template, and a logo design. But when a shop looks like that, it becomes confusing, not just for buyers, but also for Etsy, because Etsy is essentially a search engine. Its job is to understand what your shop is about so it knows who to show your listings to. When your products are all over the place, it becomes much harder for Etsy to categorize your shop and connect you with the right audience. Now, here's an important distinction. A niche doesn't mean you only sell one type of product. A niche is really the audience you serve. Think of it like an umbrella. You can still sell different types of products as long as they all make sense for the same type of customer. For example, my niche is business templates. Under that umbrella, I can sell Instagram templates, website templates, branding kits, workbooks, and other tools for entrepreneurs. They're different products, but they all serve the same audience. So when you're choosing a niche, think about the audience you want to help, and ideally, pick one where you can expand into multiple products over time. Because that's something I kept seeing over and over again with successful Etsy shops. They don't try to be everything for everyone. They pick a niche, build around that audience, and then dominate that space. Another pattern I noticed is that successful Etsy shops don't just look like a collection of listings. They start to feel like a brand. When you scroll through their shop, there's a recognizable style to everything they create. The colors, the fonts, the mockups, the design style, it all feels intentional. Over time, their listings become instantly recognizable. Think about brands in the real world. A lot of times you can recognize a brand without even seeing the name. Maybe it's the design style, the packaging, or just the overall aesthetic. Successful Etsy shops create that same kind of recognition. And I actually started noticing this in my own shop too. When I look at where my traffic is coming from, I see that more and more people are finding my shop by typing my shop name directly into Etsy. That tells me something really important. People aren't just searching for the product anymore. They're searching for my shop. And that's really where you want to get to as a seller. You want people to start recognizing your work and associating it with your shop. Because once that happens, you're no longer just another listing in a sea of similar products. Instead of competing with everyone else in search results, people can simply look for your shop directly. And that's when a shop starts to move beyond just selling products and starts becoming a brand. Speaking of building a recognizable brand, there's another pattern I started noticing when looking at some of the more successful Etsy sellers. Many of them don't just rely on Etsy forever. At some point, they eventually create their own website. And it actually makes a lot of sense when you think about it. Etsy is an amazing platform to start on because the marketplace already has built-in traffic. But at the end of the day, it's still a marketplace. You're operating inside someone else's platform and someone else's rules. When you have your own website, that becomes your home base online. You can build your email list, create your own customer experience, launch new products whenever you want, and you're not fully dependent on one platform for your sales. If you start paying attention to bigger Etsy sellers, you'll notice that many of them eventually expand beyond Etsy and create their own branded website alongside it. Now, if you ever decide to build your own website, one small thing that actually makes a big difference is your domain name. Your domain is basically your brand's address on the internet. And this might just be me, but whenever I see a link that looks really messy, like a long string of random words or numbers, I sometimes hesitate to click it. But when a link looks clean and branded, it immediately feels more legitimate. That's why having a proper domain can make a big difference for your brand. For example, instead of something generic, you could have something like your brand.store or your shop name.store. There's actually a domain extension specifically designed for online stores called .store. A .store domain works just like a .com domain, but it's made specifically for e-commerce websites. So when someone sees a website ending in .store, it instantly signals that it's an online shop to your customers and even to AI and Google. Big names like MrBeast, Cristiano Ronaldo, Rihanna, and even Emirates Airlines are already using .store domains for their online shops. But it's not just for big brands. A lot of everyday entrepreneurs and creators are using .store domains as they start building their own websites and online businesses. So if building your own website is something you've been considering for your business, one of the first things you can do is secure your domain name. Right now, there's a limited time offer where you can grab a .store domain for just 99 cents, which is honestly a really easy way to lock in your brand name before someone else does. You can use the code YALE to get this offer. I'll leave the link in the description box below so you can check it out. The third pattern I noticed is that successful Etsy listings make it incredibly easy for someone to understand the product. And this usually comes down to three things: their product photos, their title, and their description. First, let's talk about product photos, because this is something I say in my videos all the time, and I really want to emphasize it. Your product photos are everything. They are the single biggest factor in whether someone decides to buy from your listing or not. Yes, your title and description are important for SEO. They help your product show up in search results. But if we're being honest, most buyers aren't carefully reading titles or descriptions anymore. When people are shopping online, they're usually scanning visually. I know that's what I do when I'm buying something. If the photos make sense and show me exactly what I'm getting, then I'm interested. That's why successful Etsy sellers don't just focus on creating great products. They also focus on presenting them well. This is actually something you see in retail stores as well. Even if a store has great products, they still invest in merchandising and product displays because there's a science behind how things are presented. The way a product is displayed can heavily influence whether someone decides to buy it or not. And honestly, this is something I had to learn over time in my own shop too. In my earliest listings, my product photos were definitely not the best. Over the years, I've gone back and redesigned many of them as I figured out my branding and how I wanted my listings to look. So if you're building an Etsy shop, don't just focus on creating great designs. Spend just as much time learning how to present them well, because the way you present your product can make all the difference between a listing that gets views and one that gets actual sales. Another pattern I noticed when looking at successful Etsy shops is that most of them have a lot of listings. And I mean a lot. If you look at shops that are doing really well, you'll often see hundreds, sometimes even thousands of products in their store. This is something I think a lot of beginners underestimate. Sometimes people tell me they're not getting sales on Etsy, and when I look at their shop, they might only have 5 or 10 listings. The reality is that Etsy is very much a numbers game. The more listings you have, the more opportunities you create for your products to show up in search results. And that alone increases your chances of being discovered by buyers. Each listing is essentially another door into your shop. The more doors you have, the more chances someone has to walk in and find something they like. And once a buyer lands in your shop, having a larger catalog also gives them more options to choose from. There's also a credibility factor. When buyers land on a shop that has hundreds of listings, it signals that the seller has put time and effort into building their store. It feels more established and trustworthy compared to a shop that only has 1 or 2 products. So if you're serious about growing on Etsy, try to think of your shop like a growing catalog rather than just a few products. Every new listing increases your chances of being discovered, and over time, those opportunities start to add up. The fifth pattern I've noticed is that in most successful Etsy shops, only a handful of listings are actually doing most of the heavy lifting. This might surprise some people, but I see this pattern in my own shop too. Even though I have a lot of listings, not all of them sell consistently. I often think of my listings as doors into my shop. The more doors I have, the more chances someone has to discover my store. But once they're inside, only a few products tend to become the consistent bestsellers. Those bestsellers are usually the listings that keep bringing in traffic and sales over and over again. And when a product earns the bestseller badge, it can really amplify that effect. When buyers see that badge in search results, it signals that the product is popular and trusted, which makes them more likely to click on it. I also see this pattern when looking at data from other Etsy shops. When you analyze successful stores, you'll often find that a small number of their listings generate a large portion of their sales. It's very similar to the classic 80-20 principle, where a small percentage of products produce the majority of the results. So if you're building an Etsy shop, don't stress if every single listing isn't selling. That's completely normal. The goal is to create enough products that eventually a few of them start to stand out and become consistent sellers. And once those best sellers take off, they can lift your entire shop along with them. So if there's one big takeaway from this video, it's this. When you take the time to study successful Etsy shops, you start to notice patterns. And the goal isn't to copy them exactly, it's to understand what's working and then add your own twist to it. That's honestly one of the fastest ways to get better at any business. And if part of your goal is building something that feels like a real brand, securing your own domain is a simple place to start. You can check out .store domains in the description below. They're currently offering them for just 99 cents if you use the code YALE. As always, thank you so much for hanging out with me today. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do. It really helps my channel. And I'll see you in the next video. Bye!